Good morning. It is great to have y'all. You know what I love about this church is that people love to visit. And I really do love that. It does make it hard for us when we start classes, but it's really great. I've in the last number of weeks gone by some folks after church and said, guys, church is over. Y'all can go home. They said, we just like being here together. And I think, what a great thing. I can remember used to that I would hear elders and other people say at other places that when you come into the auditorium, you need to get quiet and get yourself in the mood for worship and everything else. I've never agreed with that. I think we meet each other in the auditorium and it's like we see family and we want to visit and spend some time. And I think it ought to be a little raucous and peaceful all at the same time. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. So I love that. I don't ever complain that people want to be together. Well, we're in 3 John. This is our last Sunday morning of this particular class, so I hope that it's going to be helpful to you. As you saw this morning, we're going to start some new classes for summer, and you can pick which ones you want to be in. But I want to back up a little bit and read all the way from verse 5 down to the end of the chapter, and then we'll look at these things more individually. So 3 John, and it's only one chapter, so verses 5 through 14. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers. And remember that he's writing to Gaius, who is a member of the congregation where he's writing, and he's talking to him. You have borne witness who have borne witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you will do well. Because they went forth for his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such, that means to accept such, that they may become fellow workers for the truth. I wrote to the church, in other words, he's writing to Gaius now, the individual. He's already written to the church, but here's what happened then. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has a good testimony from all, and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our testimony is true. And then these final greetings. I have many things to write, but I don't wish to write to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. Or if you have the Greek, we will speak mouth to mouth. Peace be to you. Our friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. All right, so here's the situation, and Steve talked about this last week, so I just want to briefly do that before we get down to Diotrephes himself. He says, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers, and they've borne witness of your love before the church. In other words, Gaius is a person who is a person given to hospitality. This is the main object. When you start at verse 5, it's the main reason that he writes this entire letter. He says, you do for the brethren and for strangers. Well, who are these brethren? He calls them brethren in verse 5. And you couple that with verse 8, where John tells the church to support such men. And he talks about such men or a certain type of person. What is he talking about? These are people who have gone on the road. They are traveling missionaries or traveling evangelists who are going around. They don't have a local congregation, but they go around and they preach everywhere. Some of them are prophets, some of them are preachers, but that's what they do. Every church and every church member is supposed to be an ambassador for Christ. But in fact, this was a category of people that were known for the fact that they had gone on the road to spread the gospel. They were traveling to do it. These groups of traveling missionaries is on its way to the church where Gaius is a member. They're on their way. In fact, they probably just got there when Gaius got this letter, because I'm pretty sure Demetrius is carrying the letter with him when he goes with him to meet Gaius. And John says, receive them. Give them every support that they need. Send them on their way in a Christian way. You know, in the ancient world, hospitality was considered, even among the pagans, to be a really sacred duty. If you were traveling on paved Roman roads, every 50 miles you would find an inn, what was called a post house. And these were put up and made possible by the Roman government so that you would not have to travel more than 50 miles without finding a place for an inn. But those post houses were horrible. They were horrible places. The ancient world writes a lot about the inns and post houses of that time. They were unsafe. Thieves were generally there waiting for you, and that's not a good thing. So when you look at that and you think about it, there were thieves there. There were government spies that used to hang out and listen to people there. The accommodations were dirty. The food was terrible. The rooms were flea infested, and the price you paid was exorbitant. Okay? These are not Holiday Inns. These were not Hampton Inns. That's really not what's going on here. And the Greeks particularly had a huge dislike of taking money for hospitality. So they considered innkeepers to be the lowest of the employed people. They really did not like it. They said you shouldn't ever take money for putting people up. That was their thought behind it. What the ancient world had was, oh, by the way, can I just say this? Plato wrote about the innkeepers. It was interesting, and the inns. He said they are pirates who hold their guests to ransom before they allow them to escape. In other words, it's like they kidnap you because they're charging you so much and you can't leave until you pay them. Plato couldn't stand these people. And so the ancient world instead had a system of guest friendships. Families from different parts of the country undertook other members of their family when the occasion came and took care of them when they would travel. Now, I want you to know that that system lasted for centuries. It's been going on for centuries before John writes this letter. It's been going on along. And when it's claimed, the person who came would carry with him a cymbalon, sometimes called a symbolo or cymbalon, which is a token that identifies the host. To the host who this person is. In other words, they're bringing something from the family that this host is going to know. This means this guy has the right to stay there. Otherwise, you could get a total stranger who has some kind of bad idea of what to do. Now, in a lot of the major cities, they had a person called the proxenos in larger cities. And so you can go and find the proxenos if you went to a city, and he would help you find a place to stay and get help if you needed help. But people traveled with a referral, with some kind of recommendation from a family member or a friend in order to do that. And so I want you to think about this one. Demetrius shows up at Gaius' house and says, John said, you'll take care of me. And he hands him the letter. That's really what's going on. So this is maybe the first time Gaius has ever laid eyes on Demetrius, and maybe the first time that he knows that Demetrius is coming is the day he shows up. How would you like that? All of a sudden somebody shows up and says, John said you would be really good to take care of me. We'll talk about Demetrius in just a little bit. But I just want you to think about that. There's a knock on your door. There's a guy with a letter, and he says, John says you'll take care of me. Oh, let me read the letter first. And he reads the letter and says, okay, come on in. And he takes care of him. How long do you plan on staying? Well, I don't know. However long the church needs me, I guess. So overnight, probably longer than that. A few days, maybe a little bit longer. If I'm Gaius, I'm thinking, you're kidding. Benjamin Franklin said that fish and visitors grow stale and stink after 3 days. And I think maybe sometimes that happens with us as well. But Gaius is really faithful at taking care of other people, and he's done it so much that when they went back to their home congregations or when they went back to other congregations, they said, Gaius over there really took care of us. And they said it to the whole church. That's what we read, that they said it to the whole church. And not only do they talk about how he took care of them, it says in verse 6, they testified of your love. I find that interesting. John does not call it hospitality, even though it was. He doesn't talk about cooking and cleaning and conversing and feeding and giving and supporting and housing. He just calls it love. Because, in fact, that's what it is. The cooking and the cleaning and the housing and the preparing and taking care of them is really agape. Wanting and doing what's best for the object of your love. That's what it is. It's the word that the Bible uses to describe the love of God, and that's exactly what he's done for these men. So the whole church back in Ephesus hears about it, and they know about Gaius. If the pagan world was given to hospitality, and it actually was, how much more should Christians be given to hospitality? I want you to listen to what Peter says. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Without grumbling is important here, okay? So you show hospitality and you're happy to do it. That's the idea. And then the writer of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Taking care of strangers is an interesting thing. What he's telling you is that there's the possibility, if you take care of strangers, that it might just be an angel. That's what he's telling you, that it's actually possible that one of the strangers you don't know that you had the opportunity to help might be sent by God for just testing you. Might be angels. Listen to Paul and what he has to say about it. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 9 and 10, when he talks about the widows, and in particular the widows that you would enroll under full-time support, not just help occasionally, but enroll and make them a part of the congregation. Do not let a widow under 60 years of age be taken into the number, not unless she's been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she's brought up children. And then he says this, if she has lodged strangers. They didn't take in a widow under their full support unless she had shown hospitality and lodged strangers. I find that really significant. That's how important it was to the early church. How about Romans chapter 12, verse 13, where Paul says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Now that's particularly a characteristic of the leaders of the church in the New Testament. Listen to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, when he gives qualifications of the leaders. An overseer, or a bishop, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable. In other words, you can't have a guy who's not hospitable be an elder in the church. They have to be hospitable. Or how about Titus chapter 1, verses 7 and 8, where he tells Titus, again, qualifications for the elders. An overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable. Verse 8. That's where he started. This is Titus chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. Justin Martyr wrote his first apology in AD 170, okay? And where he's writing about Christians and churches. And he said, on the Lord's day, the well-to-do contribute as they will, and it's the duty of the church to succor the orphans and the widows and those who through sickness or any other cause are in want, and those who are in bonds, and the strangers sojourning among us. He said that was the common practice of the church, and that's what the church did. The well-to-do took care of the ones who couldn't take care of themselves. So I'm just saying that the early church was meant to be a place of open doors and loving welcome. It's the way that it was set up, the way it was supposed to be was that way. I think there's very few things that are more noble than taking care of strangers. When Beverly and I were much younger, we lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and if you know something of Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades is right there, and it's a major port not only for others, but it's a major port for the Navy. And so we would, every Sunday, there would be some ship in port, and soldiers who were members of the church would show up at the Andrews Avenue congregation where I preached. And Beverly and I knew, and she did every single Sunday, she prepared enough so that we could have enough for anywhere from 2 to 10 people in addition to our family every single Sunday. And Beverly never knew how many were coming. We just knew that these guys hadn't had a home-cooked meal in a while. And so we would invite them, and boy, did they eat. It was really amazing. We'd have some of them were officers, some of them were simply the regular soldiers that were there, but they would come in every single week. And can I tell you that it blessed us more than it blessed them? We loved doing that. We had the best time doing that. Once a month, we would have on a Sunday night a dinner at church. And any visitor who came, we would feed them after services on Sunday night. What we found is that during spring break, all the college kids found out about that, and we might have 100 to 150 kids show up that were ready to eat. Well, you just had to be ready for them. It was a wonderful thing. We had a great time with that. It was always good. I always noticed that they showed up on Sunday night, not Sunday morning, and they were sunburned, which tells me something. But we did have an opportunity to help them, and that was a good thing. The church's family circle has to be wide enough to welcome strangers. It has to be wide enough to do that no matter where they come from. And by the way, that hospitality starts right here in our auditorium and when people walk in the building. I think you know this, but the first 40 seconds that a person comes into this building are absolutely critical. If a stranger walks in this building and nobody says hello in the first 40 seconds, they will have an attitude about this church that we're not very friendly. And can I tell you why they'll think that? Because we're not very friendly. If we're not catching them when they first come in, we're missing such an opportunity. We need to let them know. When a person walks into a Bible class, one of the bravest things that a visitor will ever do is walk into a Bible class full of people they don't know. If somebody in the first 10 seconds they walk in that door doesn't welcome them and make them feel at home and say, here, sit with me, let's talk a little bit, and just enjoy their company, they're not coming back, okay? The likelihood is they're not coming back. Hospitality starts right here. I see some people come in who are members of the church say, I just come here for God. I just come here to worship. And they walk in right at the last minute. They sit down and then get up as soon as they can and they leave. What you're missing is so amazing. What you're missing is so amazing. And what it could be for you is so much more. Well, anyway, let me move on. In verse 7, when you look at verse 7, he says that these people who are traveling have gone forth for the sake of the name, and they take no assistance from the pagans. In other words, even they've left their work, they've left their home, they've left their friends, and they don't have any means of support, and they're not taking any money from the pagans. Now, this is important because there was a common practice, again, among the ancient pagans of the time that John is writing, and it had been going on for several hundred years, of what the ancient world called begging priests, okay? They would say that they had an allegiance to some god or goddess, and they would go and say, we have no means of support, and they would beg everywhere they went. There was one guy who called himself a slave of the Syrian goddess, and he said he went out begging and never came back with fewer than 70 bags of money. Okay? So this was an abusive practice where people begged in the name of their God all the time. But the Christian missionary said, we don't do that. We don't take money from people that aren't Christians. We don't take money from pagans. We're not going to do that. That's not the way that it's supposed to go. So John says, take care of these. He says to Gaius, take care of these people. He says they are fellow workers. When you do that, you're fellow workers with the truth. That's verse 8 that we noted a few minutes ago. There's a real Christian thought here that I'd like to share with you. Again, I promise I will get to diatrophies. But here's the thing. There are people in this congregation and all over the world who are not in a position to become a traveling missionary. I absolutely love what our missionaries are doing. I love the fact that Aaron and Betsy and their family uprooted themselves and went to France and established a church where a church had not been. I love the fact that it's growing. I love the sacrifices that they're making. And I know how difficult that it is. Some of the times it gets discouraging when everything depends on you. It's a very difficult thing to do. But not everybody can do that. Maybe because of health, maybe because of family, maybe because of financial conditions. You're required to stay where you are and work and do what you do right where you are. But here's the beautiful thing about that if you help take care of the missionary, you share in their work. You're doing something with them. And when God gives credit to the great work that Aaron and Betsy and that other people are doing all around the world in Australia and New Zealand and South America and Central America, God says, guess what? That's your work too. And while they get credit, you do too. You're helping them. You're helping to support them. Where we can't go, sometimes our money and our prayers and our practical support can go. I want to ask you to do something for me and for them, and I think especially for God. I don't want you to talk necessarily about our missionaries in France and New Zealand and Australia and South and Central America, the Philippines. I want you to get to know them by name. I want you to write them, send them cards. And by the way, if you'll check the time differences, you can get on Zoom with them and actually talk to them face to face. I want you to do it so that you don't talk about our missionaries in France. You talk about Aaron and Betsy. You talk about our friends who were there. I want you to become friends with the people who are doing that. You'd be amazed what a difference that it can make to them. There are days that missionaries just feel like everything has gone wrong. And when they get a card or a call or a Zoom meeting, you wouldn't believe the difference that it makes. You know, Mark Twain said, I can go for a week on one compliment, okay? They can go a lot longer when they know you care. So do that. Giving to the church and helping support missionaries and evangelistic efforts across the world, helping to feed the hungry and clothe the naked, it's not so much an obligation, it's a privilege. It's not just a duty, it needs to be a delight. God loves a cheerful giver. Now that brings me down to where I really am trying to get to, okay? Look at verses 9 through 14. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds which he does, prating against us with malicious words. And not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. In other words, if these missionaries came and Gaius brings them in, then Diotrephes is going to try to kick him out. He's going to try to kick out Gaius out of the church or anybody else that's taking care of the missionaries that have come their way. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our testimony is true. I have many things to write, but I don't wish to write to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. Peace be to you. Our friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. In other words, you greet them by name. I care about them. And again, the reason the letter is written is because of the characters. There are 4 characters in this letter, okay? One of them is John, who writes the letter. The other is Gaius, who gets the letter. But the 2 principal characters that he's going to bring up that need to be dealt with are Diotrephes on the one hand and Demetrius on the other. I want us to look at those 2 guys for just the next few moments and see what it is. Can I tell you that in the church, there was kind of a double ministry in that early church. There were the apostles and prophets who didn't have a local church primarily. They were over all the church, okay? The apostles were apostles for the entire church worldwide, and they traveled as they could to go and visit those and encourage them and teach them. That's what they did. The prophets would go from church to church, inspired by God to speak God's word to it. On the other side of that, there was the ministry that was set up by Paul and Barnabas at the end of the first missionary journey, that it says that they established elders in every church. You remember? So what are the elders in every church? The elders in the church are responsible for the health and ministry of that church. There is no worldwide organization under which all of us are, but there was a local church with local autonomy, but then there were the apostles who had authority over all the church at the time. There are no apostles now, so we don't have that. We don't have prophets now like we had then either. But we do have traveling evangelists still that do that travel and go. Now, here's what happened. In the early days, that wasn't particularly a conflict. because the church was new and revelation wasn't complete. And so you had people that needed folks to come in and give them a word from God. But as the scripture came closer to completion, and as they learned more and more of what the church was supposed to be, there became a reluctance to have somebody come in and tell you what to do. Am I making sense here? That's the responsibility of the elders and the ministers of this particular congregation. We don't want other people coming in and telling us what to do. I remember when Beverly and I in 2006 were arranging to go to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. We were going with Beverly's mom and dad. And Beverly's dad had started the church at Pearl Harbor. Back in the 1950s, he began that church. The building that they were meeting in was a building he had helped to build with his own hands as they were there. So I called up the office and talked to the elders and to others. By the way, the one who helped me most was the secretary. But I will just tell you that I talked to the elders, and this is their first response. I said, we're going to be coming. I told them when we were going to be coming on the 50th anniversary of that church's establishment. And I said, I think it would be really nice if my father-in-law could speak on that day, since he was the one who started that congregation. None of the elders remembered him, because they weren't there when he established it 50 years earlier. Some of them weren't even born when he established it 50 years earlier, and none of them had been living in Hawaii at that time. They didn't really know who he was. And I remember one elder saying, I'm not trying to be difficult, but we get people all the time coming over here to speak at our services so they can write it off on their taxes. And he said, and we don't know what they believe or what they teach. And we're reluctant to let someone whose doctrine we don't know speak at our congregation. I said, congratulations, that's exactly the way I feel about it. It's exactly the way I feel about it. I said, but if you have any questions about him, I'd be glad to answer those. But I think you probably have a history. Now, here's where we were helped by the secretary. She found the records of the establishment of that congregation and shared it with all the elders, and they came to know who Lynn Cook was and what that meant. And so they called us back and said, of course, we want him to come. And it was a wonderful experience to go back to that place. But I think it's the responsibility of the elders not to just let anybody stand up and speak. If you go to Orlando, and I'll say this to all of you who may preach, but if you go to Orlando, there's a lot of folks who want to go to Disney World and ride off part of that. And so there's a Gateway Church of Christ right at the entrance to Disney World. And you wouldn't believe how many preachers go down there and speak on Sunday so they can spend the rest of the week at Disney World and ride it off. They shouldn't. I'm telling you, they shouldn't, but that's what they do. But it's not a healthy thing just to let anybody come in and speak. That's not the way that it should be. So there's a reluctance and a resistance that's coming up. And Diotrephes is resisting, but boy, is he overboard. You can't just say that Diotrephes is that he's trying to keep the church pure. I don't think that's going on. But I will say that there still is that situation. Every once in a while I'll get a call and say, you know what, you need to get me to come and speak at Creve Hall. And there are some of them I think, I appreciate your request, and the answer is going to be never, but I'm not going to say that to you right now. But some of them I just simply don't trust. Doctrinally, I don't trust them. And so, no, we don't want just anybody here. But Diotrephes goes way beyond that. I don't know if he is an elder or just a bullheaded member. I'm not really sure. If he's an elder, then he's certainly not doing what an elder is supposed to do. Titus chapter 1, verse 7, a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed. But Diotrephes is self-willed. He says that he loves to have the preeminence. He wants to be number one. Diotrephes in this congregation wants to be number one. I remember there was a church in central Alabama when I was much younger. I went and held a couple of meetings there, and it didn't take me long to realize that there were two families in that congregation that were the primary supporters of that church, and they did not like each other. And they were constantly fighting over who would be in charge of that church. It was not a happy situation. And as a result, the church never really grew. It can't when you've got that kind of thing going on. But in this case, Diotrephes, he says, it's my way or the highway. Either do what I tell you or I'll kick you out of the church. So I take it that he either had authority or he assumed authority. Now, there are people who assume authority, and if you're willing to give it to them, they'll take all of it you can give. A number of years ago in another place, one of the ladies in the congregation had made tablecloths for all of our major events so that we would all have tablecloths. One of our members, not the lady who made it, but one of our members took it upon herself to take care of the tablecloths. And she used her role as taking care of the tablecloths to control every event in that church. If you wanted to do anything, she would not give you permission because she was not ready for you to get her tablecloths. They weren't her tablecloths, okay? And when Beverly and I moved to that congregation, several of the ladies said, we don't know what to do about her. She controls everything. And Beverly said, who gave her the authority? He said, nobody, she just has it. And so we just have to do it. Because we need the tablecloths when we have nice events. What can we do? Beverly said, make more tablecloths. And all you do is just make new tablecloths and don't even ever ask her for hers again. And so after they made the tablecloths and they had the events that were going on, the lady realized she had lost her power. And so she called for a meeting of all the ladies and had a ceremony to turn over the tablecloths to the ladies. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Some people will just really like authority. That's what they want, okay, is just authority. And what was it that Jackie Gleason said? If you've got it, you've got it. If you don't have it, but you act like you've got it, you got it. That Diotrephes, okay? That's where he is. He's taken charge. Whether people have given it to him or not, he's taken charge and he's done this. Now, who's the guy now that he doesn't want to take care of? His name is Demetrius. Demetrius was a common name in the ancient world, but there are two particular Demetriuses that you find in the scriptures, in the New Testament. And I find these fascinating, and I have no idea if they're either one of these guys. But the first Demetrius that you run into is over in Acts chapter 19. I want you to listen to this, verses 23 through 28. About that time, there arose a great commotion about the way, for a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Diana, had brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised, and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. And when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. Okay, this is really interesting to me, and I probably need to move on. But Demetrius made his money making these shrines, okay? Could this be the Demetrius? Could it be that after this event that he became a Christian and now he's going over here as a missionary, and Diotrephes says, I know who you are. I doubt it, but it's possible. I'd like to give you another intriguing possibility. The other Demetrius that you read about in Scripture is not actually called Demetrius. He's called by the shortened form of Demetrius. His name is Demas, okay? Demas was a fellow worker with Paul. You read about that in Colossians 4:14, Philemon chapter 1, verse 24. But by the time that you get to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10, when Paul is now approaching the time of his martyrdom, he says, Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. That Demas, okay? Is it possible, and I always pray this is true, is it possible that Demas repented, came back and is now a missionary, like Paul was a missionary? He had been a missionary with Paul. Is it possible that he's taken that back up again? And if so, is it possible that Diotrephes' objection is he forsook Paul? He loved this present world. There's no way we're going to support him. No way we're going to let him come and preach to us. Can I tell you that I'm not looking at ancient history right here, if that's the case. I'm looking at our history. A person makes a mistake. A person falls into sin. A person gives up his first love. And we pray for him, and we rebuke him when it's necessary and encourage him to come back. And then he comes back. What do you do next? Do you say, I remember when you messed up. I remember what it was like. I don't think I'll ever trust you again. You're going to have to spend a lot of time proving to me that you're going to be faithful. I don't think we're a lot different than Diotrephes sometimes. I think that may be us than when we do that. I think we're more like the elder brother who says, when this your son who devoured your living with harlots returns, you've killed the fatted calf for him, and he won't go in. Sometimes we're more like the elder brother than we are like the God who said, bring him back and welcome him. Sometimes that's where we are. I want to tell you that James said, I'm going to deal with him when I get there. I love this. Or John says, not James. John says, I'm going to deal with him when I get there. Now, I know that John is the apostle of love. I get that. But there's another side of John you need to see. Okay, Mark 3:17, James the son of Zebedee and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. These are guys with really bad tempers. Does John love? Yes. Does he have a bad temper? Oh, yeah, he does. He's had to fight it all his life, okay? Do you remember Luke chapter 9 when the Samaritans wouldn't let him come because he was going to Jerusalem? Listen, chapter 9, verses 51 to 54. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because he was going to Jerusalem. When his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? He didn't say, do you want to send it? He said, let us do it. We just want to burn those things to the ground. Now, this is the John that Diotrephes does not accept. I think he better hold his breath and think about it before he does much else. When John says, I'm going to see him face to face, I'm going to be right there. I'm going to deal with him. He's loving, but he has some tough love about him together. God intends for us to take care of missionaries. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 7 through 11, who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard without eating any of its fruit? Who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? Do I say these things on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it's written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the ox when it treads out the grain. Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Doesn't he certainly speak for our sake? It was written for our sake, because the plowman should plow in hope, and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing the crop. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? I think that's really significant. What he's telling you is that people who serve God and preach, people who do what they need to do, should be supported. Now, Paul said, I'm not going to take anything from you so that you can't brag that you made me rich. I'll support myself. But he said they should be. My dad has been a preacher, was a preacher for my whole life as I was growing up. I can remember him coming home after a meeting, because he never charged anything for a meeting. If you wanted to pay him, that was fine. But his financial planner said, you have to set a fee. He said, I will never do that. I'll preach because I'm supposed to preach, not because you're paying me. And so some weeks he would come home after a week-long meeting with the back end of the station wagon full of corn, and we would shuck the corn all night. And that was our pay for the week. Sometimes it was beans. I hated those string beans. Those are really difficult. But we would have a whole carload full of string beans, and that's what we would have for payment. My father-in-law settled a real huge church dispute in Central Florida at one time. And when he came home, the back end of his station wagon was full of peanuts. And I said, you really did work for peanuts, didn't you? I mean, that's what he got. Whether my dad was paid or whether he wasn't, he would preach anyway, because that's what he did. And I think that's what we do. But what he says is, if we choose not to pay for the missionaries, if we choose not to support people who are bringing the gospel to the world, it says more about us than it does about them. If a congregation wants to be blessed, it helps. If it doesn't want to be blessed, then it can stay stingy and say we don't have enough money. But the fact of the matter is, that makes the difference. Listen to verse 12. Again, Demetrius has a good testimony from all and from the truth itself, and we also bear witness, and you know that our witness is true. He says, I want you to know, first of all, everybody says Demetrius is a good man. Everybody does. And he says, and in fact it's true. When he says, and from the truth itself, he's not talking about, and from the gospel itself. That's not what he has in mind. It's sort of like worshiping in spirit and in truth, in the sense that he's a good man. Everybody says he's a good man, and in fact, he really is a good man. And he said, and I'm telling you, he's a good man, and you know I'm telling you the truth. He said, support that man. What I'd really love to know is what happened next. Okay, when Gaius took him in, and Diotrephes tried to throw him out, what happened to this church? I have no idea. I have no idea. But I'd like to know. But the fact of the matter is, John says Demetrius is doing evil. He's harmful, hateful, ugly. He's doing evil. I want you to do good. There are times when you have to buck the authority of somebody else to do the right thing. I think Gaius was probably not as strong a personality as Diotrephes, or he would have never gotten to where he was in that church. But sometimes, even when you would prefer not to have conflict, sometimes you just have to stand up and do the right thing. Don't be afraid to do that, because you're just held in the arms of God when you do, and it will be okay. You know, our time is up. I would love to say more, but I think this is enough. Let's have a prayer. Father, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you for giving us this moment together. Help us to be the people who glorify your name. Help us to be people who accept those who are seeking to do good. Help us to be an encouragement. Help us never, ever to flag in our zeal to see your word preached throughout the entire world. Thank you for being our God. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys.